We're back with the Mythic Dungeon International as our upper semis are getting underway between Buff War, Nerf Rogue, and King of Ruins. We'll also be starting on a particularly ruinous dungeon on this one, Salute. It's going to be King's Rest, which is also one of the time trial dungeons. Some very nasty affixes.
I mean, technically, King of Ruins should take that map. It is King's Rest.
On
the flip side,
what if they are resting?
Yes.
What if they're resting?
Please stop.
Excellent. See you guys. See you guys at BlizzCon.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what to expect from this team. We haven't really seen them before, what they can do. Fourth in the time trials, if I'm not mistaken. So it's going to be interesting. Time trial dungeon indeed, but nothing to scoff at with a King's Rest with Necrotic. I mean, I'm already having heart palpitations thinking about the bridge with Necrotic and Fortified on top of it.
Oh, especially those heavy melee compositions. Isn't that your favorite with Quaking Salute?
Oh, it is, especially when they just kind of forget that the tank is there and they all kind of just jump on you, and then and then you go down, and then what's wrong with this tank?
And then your healer has to heal them, or just keep on smiting onto that one and just assume he's going to be okay. But let's see if these teams are going to be all right as Buff War Nerf Rogue is facing off against King of Ruin in the King's Rest.
And nothing too crazy with the comps here. We do have a, I don't know if that's Fury or Arms, we'll see in a second, but nothing too crazy about the comms that jump out at me, at least, Nagura. I mean, we have the usual tanks and healers coming out. We have the double rogue on each side, but we just have a warrior instead of a monk, which hasn't exactly proven to be that successful, especially without any, providing a 5% debuff.
Yeah, at this point, I mean, it's funny to say that it's not even a weird thing to see a warrior as DPS anymore in this eastern region, just because we've seen so many of them today, which in theory is really uncommon. I don't think we've seen a single damage warrior come out of the western region yet, except last weekend, where everyone just kind of played whatever the hell they wanted. Now, King of Ruins, unfortunately, having some trouble here as the Restitute is going down. I believe it was an AoE cast from the Void-Touched Emissary or a frontal from the Guardians here. They definitely have some trouble with this pull, as Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue seems to be dealing with the same pull, just a lot safer on their side.
Yeah, a lot safer indeed, and King of Ruins going down in Ruins right now. Healer goes cheat death proc on DDB. Nailed it as well, so not available for 6 minutes. Already kind of starting on a rough note as Iron procced Undulating Tides. Not sure, I'm just going to start with the Undulating Tides. He procced Undulating Tides. And 20 stack of Necrotic as well, dipped quite low there. So already a bit of struggle from their part as Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue still dealing with, I believe, a quad construct pull. I mean, at this point already, Nagar, we talked about Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue in their previous series and how, yeah, they're looking good, versus some of the other teams in the East right now. But this kind of play is not going to warrant them great competition against the Eastern teams, because the Eastern teams, the Western teams, because the Western teams, for instance, would very efficiently combine these constructs with something else, the boss, the gauntlet, whatever it may be. So I'm not sure if cleaving all four of them down at the beginning is the best move here.
Yeah, you're definitely right. I mean, they are going to get the percentage from it, and they're going to be able to skip a lot of trash later on in the bridge, and that's the whole reason why they're doing this strategy. But with the Western region just cleaving it on top of something else and being just so much more efficient, while Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue has to commit 2 minutes of their time here at the start of the dungeon to be able to finish this pull, definitely is going to make a big difference. Now, they also didn't really commit their Bloodlust for this pull, meaning they're either going to save it for a big trash pull here, and there we go, the Bloodlust is being popped for Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue as they pull 2 of these trash groups on top of each other. And these are the most dangerous ones probably in the whole area, except the bridge later, just because there's the Witch Doctors who constantly cast Deathly Chill, which does a huge amount of magic damage to the tank, and it's so hard to deal with, especially if you have Necrotic and also Quaking on top of it. Yeah,
it's certainly a very scary pull, and I mean, just one of those Witch Doctors themselves takes 3 to 4 interrupts just to stabilize if you include Shadow Bolt, AoE volley on top of that. So pulling 2 of them, there's definitely going to be some that leak onto the Warrior, Spell Reflect or not, but good to see that they pulled it off, as they said, at 16% trash. Of course, a lot of trash being already accomplished earlier with the 4 constructs, as King of Ruins has done a similarly large pull. No, they haven't actually. They only pulled 1 pack, and a bit of trouble there for Aeronol. I mean, King of Ruins is the first time we're seeing them right now. They're certainly playing slow and steady, but the amount of times I've already looked over and the tank is kind of on their deathbed, Undulating Tides is proc, just, low, about to die, and they're only doing 1 pack at a time, worries me about when they're going to get to the bridge, but I suppose there's no point jumping the gun just yet until we see exactly how they fare out. They still only have 1 death on the board versus Buff Warriors 0 deaths, who have also just done another double pull here.
Yeah, one more thing to note is that Ching is actually playing Dwarf, so he actually does have the racial available stone form, being able able to get rid of not only necrotic stacks, but there's a lot of bleeds in this dungeon that we see the stone form being used for. That's why we see a lot of rogues playing dwarf as well, because they also have vanish, so they don't need the shadow melt. But with Ching being dwarf on his warrior tank, there's no shadow melt on him available, so that means some of the skips that we see that are being done later on cannot be done, or they have to just rest Ching up later on once everyone else shadow melted off the aggro. So it's definitely going to cost him a little bit of time, but it definitely makes sense to see the dwarf just because of necrotic on top of all the other bleeds effect that we see in this dungeon.
Right, you are. Buff Warrior, Nerf Rogue finishing up the, I believe, the remainder of their trash here as they get ready to spawn the Golden Serpent. King of Runes still once again playing it defensively as Arenal runs out of the group, but he doesn't drop his necrotic stack, so now he just refreshed and is about to hit 30 stacks here as he desperately runs the other way, jumping to and fro as the final two warriors chase him down. Now, fortunately for him, those warriors are actually crowd controllable, unlike the larger Guardian mobs, so the rest of the team's able to help displace, slow, stun, whatever is needed so that he can reset those stacks, which he does. They spread out. Both teams spread out here simultaneously for their Quaking Ching. Fair bit of damage being chunked on him right now as he gets down to 24%, but they look to stabilize and continue on the Golden Serpent, which now sits at 80%.
Yeah, definitely some trouble here to start with the Emissary of the Tides on top of the boss, doing a lot of damage to Ching. Now, King of Ruins still not using the Bloodlust here at all, as Iron drops so low, having to use his shield wall as well to be able to survive one of these pulls. LS going down, unfortunately, on their side, as they do have a Battle Rest available, so we'll see if they choose to use it. There we go, Battle Rest being casted by the Rest Druid. But yeah, just not committing their Bloodlust to these dangerous pulls and just struggling so much. Seems very weird because we mentioned this multiple times in the past. You don't really need the Bloodlust for the first boss anymore because it is a 45 setting, and the debuff, the Spit Gold debuff, got nerfed as well, so it doesn't do as much damage anymore as it did in the past.
No, certainly not. Ironall committing his rallying cry there just to try and stay alive as the final necrotic took him down to about 11%. And I mean, there's so much struggle on this warrior tank right now. I'm not sure. To be honest, they're not doing anything crazy either that I'm seeing. I'm not, there's not a mass pull coming in. He's not reaching high necrotic stack, so not sure if there's just a bit of misplay, but he's having a lot of struggle getting his health high and stabilizing it as well, constantly proccing, undulating as well. So, it's just something to look forward to, especially moving on into times when you are tested for higher kind of level of tanking no matter what, moving into the gauntlet, moving into the bridge. So, got to keep an eye on that. Not to mention that they just proc their staff on top of it, Nagura.
Yeah, just completely running out of mana on this pull here, as there were the tornadoes being spawned by the champions that if you get hit by them, it leaves a very nasty dot behind it. Does a lot of damage to the team, and just on top of that, having Quaking that does damage and a lot of tank damage as well. So they just struggled so much. The healer had to use his Innervate and also proccing his stuff, so definitely not a good thing here at the very start of the dungeon. Now they are committing their Bloodlust to the Golden Serpent, and on top also having this Emissary of the Tides. But again, I really feel like this is not very efficient. I feel like it would be a lot bigger of a use on the trash, not only because you would kill the trash faster, but just because it makes it so much safer as well. Because the comps that we are running with the double rogues, they don't really gain as much damage from Bloodlust as some other classes do. So it helps the healer and the tank a lot more than it really does the damage dealers.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. Gauntlet's already been started here, though, for Buff Warrior and Nerf Rogue, of course. We're not going to expect to see any of the constructs coming in because we do know that they cleaved all 4 of them at the beginning of the dungeon. So this kind of series of, or part of the dungeon for them will be definitely a bit safer because they're not going to have the constructs on top of it with the gauntlet here or the boss. Now, the only thing I can think of, the reasoning behind that, Nagura, would be maybe necrotic, because those constructs take a while to kill. So in a time between the gauntlet spawns here, Ching is able to naturally drop his necrotic stacks by not having the constructs present between them. But he is a dwarf on top of it, so a high caliber team should be able to pull that kind of thing off.
Yeah, I agree. It might be a safety place, but then the Guardians also cast this huge frontal that also takes them a long time to finish, so there's a lot of downtime there too. Anyway, maybe they tried it in practice and just didn't seem it's safe enough to pull off. And again, maybe they're just not being pushed enough by this Eastern region to even try this kind of risky strategy out, so they just choose to not do it. That's definitely something they have to do later, though, when they are competing at BlizzCon against those Western teams. Now, they have some trouble here in this pack, as you can see. Ching having a lot of necrotic stacks and no dwarf racial available, but they should be able to finish off as long as Ching starts kiting at some point.
Yeah, he needs to kite, or they need to kind of finish him off. Defensive Ring of Peace coming down there for from Morito, making sure that he prevents the mobs from reapplying any necrotic on Ching, who's well down the hallway. He has that blue marker on him. As soon as those necrotic stacks drop, he immediately charges back into action on those 3 mobs. Wild Growth going out and blanketing the group right now as another Axe Barrage hits them, and just wants to make sure everybody is nice and healthy. Volcanic Pulse coming in, unfortunately, while Loda tries to have a little drink or eat of the fish feast, I suppose. Next is the Queen and King combo on the side. Of course, we always have the same rotation in this dungeon, going around counterclockwise, starting with the back left, usually for this gauntlet area. Buff Warrior, Nerf Rogue, already over halfway through this gauntlet. King of Ruin now only getting to the gauntlet.
Yeah, so this Blade Storm cast here by the King can be decently dangerous because there's no real indicator of him starting the cast. So sometimes melee will be caught off guard and just get a huge amount of damage from the initial Blade Storm damage. Especially on top of something like Quaking, it can cause some issues. But for a team like Buff Warrior, Nerf Rogue, not a problem at all. And then you also see the mind control, as the Windwalker is mind controlled right now. But an immediate stun came out by one of the rogues to be to make sure that the monk is not doing any sort of friendly fire damage to the group as they finish off this pack. And then there's only going to be the Queen Satellite, which is kind of a marksman, which is the last group they have to deal with. And then they're going to be able to get into Mchimba's room. And it will be interesting to see what kind of pull they do there, how risky they're going to go, because I don't think the affixes prevent them to do a full room pull, sorry.
No, they don't, and certainly Dwarf will help with that. So, I mean, they can grab everything if they have the damage for it, combine it all together and start bursting it down. Not just that, but, you know, most of those ooey gooey rich and chewies can be prevented. I mean, they do have Ursul's Vortex, they have a Typhoon, so that could be helped. The only concern really would be the constructs. Those are a bit harder to kite, so if Ching didn't manage to get enough space between himself and those constructs to drop necrotic, that would be a problem. But with Warrior Mobility where it is and Heroic Leap kind of out in the blink of an eye, he should be able to pull that off. We'll see if they end up doing it or not. Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue spreading out here for another Quaking as they deal with Queen Patla, the final Queen/King of this King's Rest gauntlet here. King of Ruins now, still working on the second one. A lot of damage coming in. No punt there. I mean, Typhoon just came up right now. I guess he's just waiting for it, but the Channel Lightning can be interrupted by Displace abilities as soon as it starts channeling.
Yeah, so Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue, they are down with the gauntlet here as they move on. Now, you can really see the difference in the ratios here. Like, just not having the stone form available for the tank for King of Ruins definitely means they have to just kite a lot more. You see the tank just trying to reset his necrotic on their side, going all the way backwards, just having a struggle to get rid of it. While Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue just has the stone form. Once they do those big pulls, they can reset it one time, and it's such a big thing to reset stone form, especially in things like with this Mchimba room, right? You can see all of those fluids just attacking Ching, and each auto attack applying one of the necrotic stacks. So it's a huge deal to be able to have this cooldown and just getting rid of them. But they definitely do a little bit of a modest pull here. They only pull one construct with half of the fluid, so they pull half the room basically, doing everything in 2 pulls. Just a safety play at this point. They probably know that they're pretty far ahead and they don't have to risk any sort of bigger pulls. But again, I just want to mention, if they want to if they want to contest at BlizzCon, they definitely have to do some bigger pulls later on.
I mean, there is time for them, of course, to train that kind of stuff, but you can see just how dangerous this pull is, even with necrotic. It might not seem like a big deal to the naked eye because you don't have, explosives going off or bursting on the group, but I mean, just with that half pull there and a rather modest pull, as you mentioned, he was already up to 36 necrotic stacks, just kind of in the blink of an eye, so it gets out of hand quite quick as they pull the remaining half of the room along with the construct and stick to that left side of the room. King of Ruins here, a fair bit of damage coming in right now, just barely managing and struggling to heal it up as Rallying Cry comes out of Aeronol. He starts to kite away too, but you can't really kite these bosses or mini bosses, lieutenant style mobs in the gauntlet. They just don't, they're not slow, they're not mostly displaceable, and huge amounts of damage coming in from that Axe Barrage on top of the group. LS goes down on their side. Aeronol finally has reset his stacks, and they've kited Queen and King all the way out into Golden Serpent's room. Both rogues have procced their cheat death. Go-Go goes down. DDB about to go down as well. Quaking pulsing on the group, and only Aeronol and the Resto Druid are alive right now as they desperately look to try and finish Queen Wasi off, but I mean, it's already starting to get out of hand. That's what I was saying earlier, Nigger. I'm worried about this team already, not only for the gauntlet, but the bridge later. Yeah,
just huge problems for them as Resto Druid almost going down there at the very start, to the Blade Storm, which is a melee ability. It really shouldn't be in melee range at all when you fight these two mobs, just because of this Blade Storm. And then therefore, because of the Rested Root dropping so low, the tank dropped low as well, just having too many necrotic stacks. And again, the Rested Root getting hit by that Blade Storm, being in melee range, and Cat Form trying to do some damage, is playing too risky. And then the tank having to kite, not having the Stone Form, just huge problems for them. As Buffway Nerf Rogue is already working on Mchimba, 60% at this point, not committing their Bloodlust here, so they probably want to use it for one of those bridge pulls that we've seen so many teams save their Bloodlust for, just of how dangerous it is. And interesting to see what exactly they choose to skip. We constantly talk about this one Brood pack and how inefficient it is to deal with the Brood because of the amount of HP that it has and the huge area of denial that it has. So we'll see what they choose to pull and if they want to skip that Brood.
I'm kind of curious, what did they pull something extra here? Because usually teams that do all 4 constructs at the beginning are about 72%. They're 74. Did they pull the construct on the bridge, that Purifying construct with the fire?
I think it's a Void Touched Emissary that usually teams don't pull, because they finished it off, right?
Oh yeah, the one at the
start.
beginning. That's right. Yeah, of course. Okay, so that is the extra 1.5% or so that they got there. King of Ruins is just a bit more trouble there as DDB goes down yet again, adding 6 deaths to their board. So 30-second difference between the two teams for Buffalo and Nerf's Rogue's flawless run here. Now flawless, at least in the sense of no deaths on the board, but certainly a bit more modest than we've seen from them in previous weeks here as Mchimba gets down to 10% HP. You can see Ching immediately heroic leaping out of the group right now to save his poor buddy from that sarcophagus and get him out. They're going to finish the boss off here, and Tuniger, I'm very curious to see what they skip, because they've actually, not only do they have more trash percentage, which has kind of become, you know, the strat, the norm, the meta strat that teams are doing, but they have even beyond that more percentage trash. So they kind of have a lot of options on what to skip.
Yeah, so we might even see... Okay, no, we don't. We don't see the double Shroud come out here from the Rogues to be able to go to the Brute and to get the Distract. So we see the first pull here with the Berserker and the double Hex Priest, and we just see the Bloodlust being committed here, which... It seems to be a lot to commit a Bloodlust to only 3 mobs, but these mobs are just so dangerous for those teams to deal with, especially with those affixes too. You have the Hex Priest constantly casting those Spectral Bolts, doing so much damage to the tank, and then you have the Berserker just constantly applying this bleed effect. Ching already using his Stone Form to get rid of the Necrotic and the double bleed effect that he had on him from the Berserker, and now they just chain pull this Emissary of Tides on top of this double Berserker, but they want to be careful now with the bleeds, because there's no more Stone Form available, so they want their damage dealers to take the bleed for Ching.
Yeah, it's really dangerous. And, you know, part of the Bloodlust here, and teams in the West are doing it too, are not just because these mobs are particularly dangerous, but because they're trying to beat a specific time of that Brute in the back, that large abomination, getting within the pack that they just pulled. Ching here, those 17 stacks and bleeding heavily, gets a second stack. I don't know if he's going to be able to survive this right now. Rallying Cry desperately comes in, and he does go down. It's just so much damage. Loda immediately casting Rebirth after the unlucky Quake pulsing time, but fortunately for them, Ching died right at the very end of that pull, so no full team wipe there. But I mean, you could just see the danger of these mobs. Stone Form having about a minute cooldown left for Ching before he's able to use it again, and it looks like they're going to commit to getting the bridge or pre-bridge pack down here in just a moment.
Yeah, so they actually managed to get Ching across this pack with a Shroud from the Rogue without Ching having to go down because he doesn't have the Shadow Melt available. So they are dealing with this Beastmaster pack here, which is decently dangerous, but it's only 3 mobs, so as long as you deal with the Beastmaster properly, you interrupt. Most of the spells that he does cast are interruptible with a stun. They're not interruptible with normal interrupts, but you can use any sort of pushback or stun, which they have a lot of with those Rogues in their group, and also the Monk being able to do so. So they definitely should be able to not get any of those deadly shots off, or even the Poison Barrage can be interrupted on top of it. As you see the Quaking, and then afterwards they probably want to use that second Shroud from Tomboy to be able to go to the boss. They only need 11% trash, so it's going to be from this pack. But in theory, it would be a lot safer if they would go to the boss first, finish off the council fight just to get the spawn point there, because this is actually a very dangerous boss trash pack to deal with.
They actually don't even need 11%. They only need 7, because we know the last 4% comes from the Zool, the minion Zool at the end, or the Shadow Zool, excuse me, at the end. So this is pretty much the last trash that they need to deal with. They might have to deal with one Berserker. We've seen that pretty popular, but because they have that 74%, remember at the start instead of 72, that might get them just enough percent, but it won't don't matter if your healer's dead. Loda going down, they don't have a battle res. He is their battle res. I mean, they do have literally battle res available, but nobody who can use it as Tomboy gets the bleed from the Berserker and chunks down, procs his cheat death, and the final tick of the bleed finishes him off. Ching gets another bleed application to him until he starts accruing more necrotic stacks. Nobody's there to heal him right now. He goes down as Morito is forced to cancel his resuscitate on Loda because of the unlucky quaking pulse timing. So a lot of time lost here, but we know when you're as far ahead as you are of King of Ruins, who's just now popped their Bloodlust on Mchimba. To be fair, they actually did in the Mchimba room quite well. They didn't have any deaths on top of it, but I mean, they got to get a move on if they want any chance of competing with this buff wear team.
Yeah, this is what I've been speaking about. This is why a lot of teams in the past will skip past this trash pack first, go to the boss, use their shroud, just be able to get the spawn point in case something goes wrong, because it is such a difficult pack. So Loda going down there, if they would have finished off the boss first, he could have released, came back, even though you do have to self-pass the Berserkers there, but he still would have managed to get there. But this time causing a lot of trouble. Thankfully, Morito, the monk, actually can rest out of combat. If Morito would have went down, it would have been a really big problem for them to get everybody back. But they did manage to recover as they engage the council fight here, Kula being the first boss. Now on the tournament realm, the bosses are always in a set order. It's always Kula, then it's the caster, and then it's Akali at the end. So you want to keep an eye for that, just for tournament integrity, so it's fair for everybody to get the same rotation. And as we mentioned before, 96% is the exact number they need before they fight Shadow of Soul. That gives the last 4%.
Yeah, the last 4%. And you know, I kind of dig this beginning strat where they're UCD's on top of the Void Emissary anyway, because they're already committed to the 4 construct strat. So they said, let's get rid of this Void Emissary, and that Void Emissary percentage basically replaced them needing to pull one of those 2 Berserkers down. Remember, because in the West we're like, oh my god, are they gonna? Because it's really dangerous getting a Berserker, especially with Necrotic on top of a boss here. So they avoided that whole fiasco just by committing to the Void Emissary at the start of the dungeon. Worked out for well for them there. As they said, at 4 deaths, Zanazal, the second boss here, as Nagura mentioned, is spawning now. Spamming those lightning bolts. We can spell reflect those, and of course it requires a 3-man interrupt after that, so no problem for them. Hopefully what they want to be doing is beating the second totem phase usually on these bosses, so you have to deal with one, and the second one is nice to beat, otherwise it's a huge time dump. King of Ruins here at 10% finally on Mchimba. Staff has unfortunately proc from their Resto Druid, and they're at 68% trash, so they didn't deal with, I don't think, either construct. 68, usually 66% is what you see. No, sorry, 66% is what you see if you deal with only 2 of the 4 constructs, so they're just certainly missing some percent there. I believe they killed the Void Emissary on top of it, so they're gonna have to make up some more on the bridge.
Yeah, I think they only managed to kill 2 of the Guardians plus the Vortex Emissary at the start, leaving 2 behind, which is interesting because I feel like if you already commit to killing off the Vortex Emissary, you might as well kill all of the Guardians to be able to skip more on this bridge. So interesting strategy coming out of King of the Ruins here. We'll see how they deal with this bridge area, but at this point they're so far behind. Buffalo and Nerf Rogue, of course, being the #1 seed here, showing their strategy being just a lot faster and just a lot more efficient as well, as they are engaging the last boss here, Akali, while they finish off some of the totems here. Thundering Totem. Now, in general, the totems from Xenocell really not as dangerous for those full melee comps, because a lot of them can just be ignored. You definitely want to make sure you deal with the Explosive Totem, but the Thundering Totem, which just interrupts you on cast finish, is not something that melees have to bother with at all. It's really just a problem for the Resto Druid, but even Resto Druids just have so many instant casts, it's really not going to cause a lot of problems.
More predicted disaster here for King of Ruins right now as Ironall just gets just smacked by one of the Spectral Bolts as he tries to safely kite down the stairs, getting away from the bleeds from the Berserkers, which ended up going on both rogues, who are both now dead and proc their cheat death. Ironall does get battle res and immediately heads around the corner. He has the bleed again from the Berserker, which kills him right away. The Spectral Bolts do a ton of it. You know, we always kind of hype up about the Berserkers and how much damage they do and their bleed, and truthfully they do a lot. However, those Spectral Bolts from the Hex Priest do a ton of damage as well. So if they're just free casting on you from the back, like you saw there, that's what it's going to lead to. Full team wipe coming in here from King of Ruins right now, as Buff Warrior is now at 9% on Akali, the Conqueror, the final boss here. Ching, now I noticed Ching got smacked a bit earlier.
Yeah.
He was like quite low HP. I think he ate one of the debilitating backhands, got the debuff, and then got meleeed after, which makes you take tremendously increased physical damage. Nonetheless, they do finish the boss off here, and they get an easy mass stealth past the double Berserker pack that they skipped. They don't need it. And on to everybody's favorite, Shadow of Zul coming up.
Yeah, so definitely want to be careful on Shadow of Zul here. They don't have their Bloodlust available for this boss, and we've seen multiple teams have full team wipes to this very specific mini boss because it is buffed by Fortified, and Necrotic actually Necrotic is going to make it slightly more difficult because it does melee in between the cast, right? And then you have Quaking being also just percentage health damage. So this might actually cause some issues here as it does so much magic damage on Ching here. And then Loda not having Tree of Life, which is something we've seen some of the Rasta Druids go with, just to have an extra cooldown to be able to heal a tank up. And you can see the Quaking and the Necrotic, just so much damage on Ching.
Yeah, I mean, Shadow Zul's already down to about 60%. Okay, finally Last Stand comes up from Ching and Ironbark overlap. I'm not sure if that's the best, although Last Stand won't really provide that much. It'll just provide that instant temporary health boost, but after that you're just getting chunked down anyway. So we still have Shield Wall available as Loda commits his Tranquility, but unfortunately stops it because it does apply a healing over time, if I'm not mistaken, when you get Trank up. So just channels it for a second, gets the group a bit healthy with the Pulse there, and then focuses again on Ching, who is now out of cooldowns. He'll have Spell Reflect in a moment, so he'll have 5 seconds of 15% magic DR, but that's all they're going to have. And the last few percents of Shadow of Zul is where it gets particularly disastrous as another Quaking comes in, and everybody's just going to pay attention to Ching's health here, and hopefully that he survives because he's got nothing left.
Yeah, you see the Loda doing 80k single target HPS, just pumping heals into Ching. This is not AoE healing. Ching going down, unfortunately, at the very end of the boss, but they're able to finish it off. So thankfully, it didn't die earlier because that would have caused a disaster here. But they did just use the Battle Rest to be done with this faster because there's the 2 Berserkers that are left on the spawn point on the council fight. So just committing the Battle Rest here to get it back up faster, and to even have 1 more Battle Rest available to them in case something does go wrong here on King Dassar. But King Dassar usually not a boss that causes any sort of problems for these teams, just because it's not buffed by fortified. Now, Necrotic might cause some issues just because there are 3 mobs that are active later on that hit the tank, but we will see how Ching handles it.
But he has Dwarf for that, and I was going to comment earlier that, you know, Stoneform does give you a 10% DR, so he technically still had that for Shadow of Zul at the end, but it's a 2-minute cooldown, so if he used it there, he wouldn't have it available for King Dassar here when it reaches 60%. Therefore, he has Raban up, because most teams, of course, don't focus Raban. You just kind of cleave him passively on the side. And then Zala, I believe it was the second Raptor's name, when she comes down to it, there's going to be triple melee on Ching, so those Necrotic stacks are going to be building up quite quick. Another death, though, here on the side of King of Runes as their tank goes down yet again. LS follows suit, and it looks like another full team wipe in this very dangerous bridge area. That's 16 deaths on the board for them, so they're just not cutting it through there. Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue has committed their Bloodlust here, has reached the 60% phase 3, and they're looking to get Zala dead ASAP.
Yeah, you can see just how much damage they are doing here with their Bloodlust being committed on to this 60% phase. You see Reban going down as well. And Reban is really the Raptor that doesn't really get focused at all by those kind of teams, because if you want to play this boss as efficiently as possible, you just kind of cleave it off and try to put all of your damage into King Dassar. Now, Reban itself really is not too dangerous. It does jump to a target and starts casting a frontal cleave, but it can just be walked out of and not cause any sort of problems. On top of this boss, not that many super dangerous abilities. You can see the Gale Slash is being cast. It just needs to be avoided, similar to the trash mobs at the very first boss area, that if you get hit by them, it will leave a dot damage over time effect behind. It does quite a bit of damage, but those teams are just easily dodging out of the way. And then you also see that jump that just happened on Tomboy. I believe he vanished, or he actually shadow melted the jump there. So good to see that he can avoid that ability completely as well by using that racial.
You certainly can, as King Dassar gets down here to 18% for Buffer and Nerf again. Honestly, outside of the one hiccup that they had, this is the kind of team that generally we want to see, but I'm sure Zyra will talk about this. He's just coming up to this right now. He'll touch on it a bit, I'm sure, but you know, Buffer and Nerf Rogue, it's hard to say, right? Are they playing safe right now because of the fact that they know that they're way ahead in the dungeon, they already know that they're qualified for BlizzCon, or are they just not going to be up to snuff against the Western teams? We'll have to see. Nonetheless, Buffer and Nerf Rogue does take the first game quite commandingly and starts the series off 1-0.
Yeah, in many cases, Buff4 Nerf Rogue is definitely playing their own game. They had some spot deaths on the bridge in particular, but I'd say that this is about as good as it's getting for a team as Buff4 Nerf Rogue under this one's ironic. They had really challenging affixes throughout this, and based off of I don't want to say that they weren't practicing for it, but they're not practicing the same way that having a really high tier opponent or like having BlizzCon on the line would make them practice.
Yeah, we talked about it a little bit earlier, like in the day, and it's kind of one of these weird things for buff war situations in a scenario where they don't really have anyone pushing them right now. And when I'm looking at this team, to be honest, like, and I'm not trying to be BM to the other team, but buff war Nerf Rogue is the #1 seed in a region where the other really good team isn't even playing. I mean, the second best team was Black Mamba, and they didn't play particularly excitingly in their previous series. They didn't win it in commanding fashion either. So with buff war Nerf Rogue, like, it's really confusing. I want to see them getting these really fast times and being prepped for BlizzCon, but at the same time, they don't really have anyone who's pushing them to do that from behind. And this King's Rest, you know, the affixes were dangerous. This is a pretty solid time for the affixes they had. It was only within 30 seconds of their time trial time. But at the same time, you know, random spot deaths to Berserker Bleeds, random spot deaths to mechanics you shouldn't be dying to. Like, this isn't the BlizzCon form I want to see them in.
That's a great point, and we have to kind of keep that in mind when we're going into this type of series. Is they also have to look at how they're going into these dungeons with specific affixes. They'll start changing some things around. They'll be changing their pull setup, how they're dealing with necrotic. We've seen how groups are dealing with bursting in particular. So when we go into this one, Sloot, it also is kind of like them being able to set up a recording for them to watch later and watch their own preparation.
I mean, it absolutely is, but it's just, I think it's kind of what I was saying earlier, and Nagura mentioned it during the series as well. It's kind of, you know, we don't have a glimpse into the mind of these players right now. You know, we don't know what's the team mentality right now. Is it a bit more relaxed? Are we going method U style? We know we've already qualified. We know we already got whatever seed. You know, at BlizzCon, it's okay. Let's just, you know, take it easy. Let's not get angry. Let's not strain ourselves. Let's not wipe. Let's not accidentally throw a match even and start losing on top of it. So, you know, is that the form that they're having, or are they actually just pushing themselves right now? And this is the best they can do. And then, you know, that's why you have Zyro and everyone going, oh, I don't know, that's not good enough for BlizzCon. So it's hard to say. And the only way we're going to answer this question is, you know, wait a month and a half and I'll see you at BlizzCon.
That's right.
Well, the thing I'm looking at again, and I want to hammer this home, this is the last tournament practice you're going to get before BlizzCon, and I think that's a huge important. There's a huge difference between randomly practicing your keys in a practice setting when you're not playing in a tournament where you can just reset whenever you make a mistake, to actually have to play out in your entire keys. That's something you have to do in practice as well, I think for a lot of these teams, and that's something that some of them might not be doing. Even when you make mistakes, you want to see how your cooldowns pan out for the rest of the dungeon. Even you just go with the wipes and keep going, because that's going to happen in tournament play. You're not going to play perfectly every time, and you can't set yourself up for a scenario where you wipe, you just lose. You have to figure out what you can do, because the other team could wipe as well, and you need to figure out where your cooldowns are going to line up as well. So, like, the practice is really important right now. They should be looking at this as practice to figure out how they're going to play in a tournament. Even when things go wrong, you just have to know these certain things, and you can't get that outside of tournament play.
That's true, and building that kind of mentality as to what's going to be the next solution onto that one. And I think they did pretty well with the bridge pulls in particular, but we'll have to see how they're going to do it against Shrine of the Storm, because that also is a dungeon rife for mistakes waiting to happen. So we'll be taking a quick break before we go into it, guys. Game number 2 coming up on the other side of the break. Buff War Nerf Rogue is up 1 against King of Ruins, as game number 2 is right around the corner with Shrine of the Storm. Buff War Nerf Rogue's going to need this one if they want to get Kings of Ruins to King's Rest.
Yeah, this map, I watched you guys cast it in the last one. I was already worried about it because Raging. We got Raging. Yep. No, I just choose to ignore him. Sorry, don't worry about it. But, I mean, the Raging is really nasty in this map, especially with the Water Blast at the start. And it's interesting to me, and I guess that they kind of respect the danger of it, but both of these teams already clearing trash that otherwise nobody ever clears. The Sanguine's not too big of a deal here, but it's really just if somebody dies, they need to be able to run back from the dungeon, and the tank can easily be on that hit list.
Yeah, we've actually seen a big money crab do the exact same thing as they just deal with this very first area to be able to get back if something goes wrong later on. And there's so many things that can go wrong. So good on them, as King of Ruins actually uses their Bloodlust on, seems like a very small pool here at the start, but these pools are very dangerous before the first boss, just because, they pulled a Living Current. This has to be an accident. I don't think a Living Current is something you do want to pull.
This Living Current is a living nightmare here for King of Ruins, looking to ruin their day right now as they all just leap away and run away, looking to try and get out of combat. And Ironall trying to hide amongst the mobs with that Shadow Meld, but they sniffed him out and finished the job there as he immediately releases, pops his Battle Shout to rebuff himself, and runs back into action. The mobs have, of course, now reset as there were 3 deaths on the board. But, man, I mean, that Living Current is just hanging out there now. It's finally heading downstairs. There are a few ways unfortunately, in which you can actually aggro that living current with some abilities that have Z access or kind of vertical pulling or splashing or damage, whatever it may be. And I guess they just hit one of them there, and that's what caused it. Staff immediately proccing here for the Resto Druid as they get back into action, sitting at 3%, 3 deaths versus Buff Warriors 14% now as they start to move down the stairs.
You can also pull it if you accidentally typhoon some of those mobs off the platform and then the social aggro, the living current, which definitely never happened to me, as Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue is.
Is that why you know about it?
Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue is moving on as they use their shot to go past some of the trash, just pulling this or starting this event here for Aquaseer, as there's a little bit of an RP event before the boss spawns. And now we see a snapping pool that's also a pool we've seen by Black Mamba before, but Black Mamba had a full team wipe as they were trying to finish off this pool. Let's see if Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue does a better job. And King of Ruins still just struggling with the first couple of trash packs here.
Yeah, a lot of struggle coming in for them right now, 7%, and a bit more aggressive of a pull that we like to see from the teams. Templar, Spiritualist, and of course, a couple of attendants are present there, so those water blasts are going to get out of hand. Washaways are something you don't want to interrupt or waste interrupts on because, of course, they're just a swirly on the ground. You just move out of them. The Spiritualists do need to have that Mending Rapids interrupted so that they don't heal a member of the team right now. So they have very limited interrupts going around for the amount of water blasts and various casts that are needed to be interrupted. Templar going down there in the middle of the pack, meaning Sanguini will drop on them, so he needs to start kiting, and Ironall has done just that as he heads to the top of the stairs and not only line of sights them, but also helps himself survive with the incoming raging from them. Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue here, 22% as they aggro Aquaseer and have pulled... Did they pull Heldis?
Yeah.
Okay, so Heldis coming up as well. Yeah, we can see the pulsing on the side of the screen, looking to benefit from that 25% haste rune on the ground, and finally Bloodlust has been popped for them as well.
Yeah, also pulling some droplets here on top just to get a little bit of extra percentage that they will need later on. But yeah, just dealing with Heldis here, just increasing the damage, something we've seen from so many teams, especially from, I think, first from the Western region, to be able to get this damage buff. Now, it makes it a little bit more difficult on the healer just because of this AoE that you can see the winds being casted by Heldis, but should not be a problem as there's no affix making it more difficult. There's nothing like Grievous. Now, the only thing you want to keep an eye on is Raging once Heldis drops below 30%. You want to make sure that the Resto Druid does dispel the Raging effect off of it, so the AoE damage is not being buffed. And then we've also seen, I believe, Loda pulling some more droplets even from across the side here, that just to get some extra percentage on top of it as well.
Yeah, we know those droplets, of course. A lot of those kind of smaller mobs, you know, eels, droplets, the maggots in Waycrest Manor, they're not counted towards any of the affixes anymore. They were, you know, once upon a time at the beginning of the at the beginning of the expansion. Imagine a world where droplets drop sanguine and bursting and all that kind of stuff. But we don't live in that world anymore, fortunately. So all of the droplets safely on top of Aquaseer, who now hits 50% and transitions phases, splitting into 3 for his 3 Aqualings. Team has to be careful here not to get Nagura, by which I mean get punted off the platform with that surging rush. And you want to be in melee presence of one of those mobs as well, otherwise they start casting those water blasts on top of different people, and it's just a ton of damage. But pulsing coming in here from Windspeaker Heldis, a lot of damage, and finally some healing comes in from the Resto Druid to stabilize the situation. But that could have been pretty bad there because Heldis is also enraged and he's not getting soothed at all. Finally gets the soothe as Ching takes a huge chunk and pops his ablative.
Yeah, that was the problem I've been talking about. The only affix really making this much more difficult is the enrage effect, but Loda just literally not paying attention to it as we were in the intermission phase, so he had trouble being able to deal with the Aqualings, being able to tank them and staying in melee range. Maybe Heldis was out of range and he didn't want to walk there because then would have gotten the Sea Blast cast, or he was scared to getting hit by a Surging Rush as they were also going off at the very same time. Now, unfortunately, King of Ruins has some problems here with their Resto Druid going down as they were trying to do a very similar pull, a snapping pull on top of this lantern here. But Resto Druid did manage to get back to the group as they did clear the trash at the very start, so the way is clear and he can just release and come back. While Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue already finishing off Aquaseer, and yeah, that was very close to the Sanguine there.
the 2 steps back that Ching took to make sure that Heldis died not right under Aquaseer there might have honestly just saved him this boss, because if this guy started healing in a Tyrannical Affix above, I mean, he would have held well above 30-40%, so good. I mean, lucky for them, I suppose, that bit of heads-up play. So mismanagement there as Heldis had died and dropped Sanguine under the boss. No problem in the end. Still 0 deaths on the board as they have mass stealth and gone right past the Void Emissary at the top of the stairs, immediately rounded the corner, put a defensive and preventative Ring of Peace down so that the mobs don't chase. They all pop their Shadow Meld, and now they're looking to do what I would suspect to be a rather substantial pull in the room. At least that's what we've seen in the Western region. King of Ruins has now started on IQC, who is at 80%, and here they go Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue with, I believe, a double pack in right now, but they haven't pulled Runecarver Sorn on top of it, which is weird, Nagura, because as dangerous as the pull looks, it's actually made easier by the presence of Sorn there and his rune.
Yeah, the rune making sure that people who are standing inside it and also mobs who stand inside it get 75% damage reduction. So that's usually what the teams do. They will just pull everything on top. Now, it makes it a little bit difficult to kite the mobs just because everyone wants to stand inside the rune, but then you don't want the mobs to stand inside it because they also get the damage reduction. So definitely something that you want to keep in mind. And you know what? I actually have a question about Aquaseer, just because you're the one who designed this beautiful boss. What if the Sanguine does heal it all the way up and then does it split into 3 again? Is there going to be a second intermission?
My God, it's exactly like, I don't know. That sounds like some kind of crazy, bizarre world. But you know what, Nagura? You and I can go test it on live servers together later, and we'll see exactly what happens. But I actually don't know. My suspicion is no. That will not happen because they've already transitioned to a particular phase. But Buff Warrior, and also I didn't design them. Well, if you love the boss, I designed it. If you hate it, I was just there on the panel present when they were spitting ideas about the boss. So Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue here has pulled off this pull quite well, might I add, 41%. As they chew through Runecarver and Sorn's HP, you can see Ching has run to the entrance of the area in order to pull the pack that guards the Guardian Elemental's bridge, consisting of an emissary of the Tides as well. So here come the Iron Hull Apprentices on the side. We have some Gale Callers as well, who will not be able to be interrupted until that Emissary of the Tides is finished.
We see King of Ruins now still dealing with the first boss, as they were had some trouble. One of the rogues proccing that cheap death in the intermission phase. But other than that, they are fine, as they still have 1 Battle Res available as well in case someone goes down. But Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue so far ahead at this point, as they are dealing with this trash pretty well. Sanguine actually causing quite a bit of problems here in this hallway, just because there's really not that much space for the tank to kite those mobs. And some of the mobs also just move very slowly. These apprentices constantly casting this whirling slam, and the other attendants just constantly casting as well. So difficult to deal with Sanguine here, as they finish off the pull and they are skipping this bridge elemental. You see everyone just using their Shadow Melt to be able to de-aggro. Loda actually being able to not even commit the Shadow Melt at all. So good on them to save that on the healer in case something goes wrong here. They still have the Shadow Melt on the healer to get a full rest out on the group.
Pretty aggressive pull coming in here Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue, and on the side of King of Ruins, they actually just barely averted a crisis, really, where their tank fell over at the very last few percent of accuracy, but they decided it was a good idea not to commit the battle res, as the 4 of them just finished the boss off fairly safely and then use the regular res on the tank. So kudos to them on that heads-up play. Now they will soon have 2 battle res, the same as Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue, with Ching running out of this rather aggressive pack full of, I believe, 7 mobs here. So both sides plus the patrol in the middle. A lot of damage coming in on Ching, only dipping in and out during the presence of his shield block. A lot of these mobs now enraging, dealing 100% increased damage, and you only have Soothe on, I believe, a 10-second cooldown from Loda, so he can only get 1 mob every once in a while, so that's why you're seeing Ching be so modest and defensive here.
For a second, it looked like the tournament realms didn't have the Prod Warrior nerf live, because Ching was actually topping the damage meters, doing 100k DPS on this pull, so insane damage coming out of Ching, using Avatar, what I assume. Then they are gathering up those initiates. Now, these initiates should not be causing a problem. All they want to do is be careful with Sanguine, because if you have a lot of Sanguine pulls on top of each other, they actually stack. So the healing will stack, and they will just heal a lot, and you will just lose a lot of time. So you want to make sure that you kite them properly, which is what Ching is doing right now. And once they're dealt with those 2 apprentices, they have enough trash to be able to skip the next trash enforcers all the way up until this bridge area.
Uh-oh, SpaghettiOs here again for King of Ruins, as they have a full team wipe in the hallway after Heldis, so after Accusir, which is the boss that just recently killed. 11 deaths on the board right now, because I'm not sure why, but they were choosing to kill the Void Emissary at the top of the stairs there. That every team that we've seen usually skips it and Shadow Melts at the bottom, because it's just such a poor location to need to deal with a mob like that, especially with Sanguine. So it was very costly, fully costly to them, as they had a full wipe here. Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue has dealt with all of the trash present in front of Brother Ironhole and Galecaller. I love to see teams doing this right up onto that ledge. Loda finally gets up to after a few failed hops at the side there. Ching making sure that he's tanking the bosses there, avoiding the whirlwinds or the tornadoes as well. His only job really here as the tank is, well, don't die, but also make sure that you move out to drop other Iron Hull's rune elsewhere so that you can come back to this spot. And on top of it, of course, don't point that hindering cleave at the rest of the group. Everybody else in the group really doesn't have to do anything. They just sit there and DPS.
Yeah, it's really that's why some of those teams are choosing not to play this strategy, just because it is actually pretty dangerous on the tank. Because when you drop the rune outside, you also want to make sure that the mobs or the bosses are still staying in range for the melee. Even though the Alder Rocks have the increased range, the monk does not. So whenever Ching kites those bosses away, they're not able to reach them at all. So it's actually quite dangerous on the tank. And there we go, the rune actually dropping in melee range. Unfortunately, there's still some area over there to the side where you can tank the bosses too, but it's still just, just an extra difficulty in the tank, and that's why some teams choose to not play this strategy. Well, King of the Ruins, they're still, just dealing with the trash slowly but surely, definitely going a little bit slower compared to Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue, which is to be expected as they're, this is the first time we see them in this tournament, while Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue, of course, are the favorites to win the whole thing.
Okay, I mean, Ching really scared me there. He actually pulled the bosses up onto the ledge, and that, I mean, he's getting borderline boss reset territory there, so he needs to be really careful where he's kiting those bosses around, puts another rune on his original spot down right now as he sits just outside of it. The rest of the group seems to have access. Even the poor monk who doesn't have the increased melee range that the rogues do from their talent. King of Runes now still 40% trash, 11 deaths on the board as they struggle to carve through Rune Carver Soren's room. All the trash in there, haven't even pulled that mini boss yet, whereas Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue sitting here at a mighty 69%. Iron Hall and Galecaller Fae not too different, 36% and 26% for Galecaller Fae, so they're cleaving them fairly efficiently, which is what technically the strat allows you to do very safely. You don't have to worry about just killing Galecaller Fae as quickly as possible to avoid the tornadoes.
Yeah, that's what most of the teams are doing if they don't play this ledge strategy. They just focus down Galecaller Fae just to not have to deal with the Tempest cast anymore, not having to use all of those interrupts, the Slicing Blast. Now, after this boss is done for Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue, we're going to see a pretty big trash skip, as all of them are Night Elves, so all of them are going to Shadow Melt off the aggro at the very end, or at the very start of the bridge rather, and skip past a lot of the trash. Now, these the Enforcers that they're going to skip is something that we've seen some other teams pull, but because it has caused so many problems for the tanks just going down, most of the teams just choose to skip it now and just deal with the bridge trash instead, which is also pretty dangerous, but not as dangerous as those Enforcers, really.
No, not at all, and both bosses actually die perfectly at the same time here for Buff Warrior as they get ready to get going here. Enforcer patrolling just ahead of them. Everybody's already mounted up, making sure that Ching is the first person in who's popped his Sky Step Potion. I was going to say Potion of Speed, but Sky Step Potion, moving in through all the trash, making sure that he's the one to grab aggro and nobody randomly gets meleeed along the way. Everybody up on the bridge, everybody Shadow Melts, and we are out of combat, except for the rogues, of course, that use their Vanish. And up the bridge we go onto the double tentacle pull in just a moment. Now, 69%, they want to get to the kind of mid-80s region by the time they're done with Lord Stormsong. I believe they do have the ability, or the luxury rather, to skip a bit of trash here before heading over to him.
Yeah, one difficulty here for these for this tentacle pull that we see for Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue is going to be Sanguine, because those tentacles cannot be moved. So if you drop Sanguine on top of them, there's no way of you killing them off unless you finish them through the Sanguine healing, or you wait until they despawn. So you definitely want to make sure that you... Oh, Tomo actually going down to one of the frontal casts here, but they do have a battle rest as Loda immediately casts it back up. And yeah, you want to make sure that you do not drop the Sanguine as the tentacles actually died before the rest of the trash.
Yeah, that was close. Good heads up play there from Ching. He saw that two Enraged Rip Mine casts were going off from the cultists, or the Depth Bringers rather. They do a ton of damage, shadow damage on the tank. And not just that, but they decrease your maximum health by 10%. So one of them was interrupted, but in the scramble of rezzing Tomboy, who just gone down there, Ching noticed that the second one was going through, pre-popped his shield wall, and then also heroic leapt away to make sure that no subsequent cast went through. So well done by him as the 12th death comes in here for King of Ruins. Gogo unfortunately goes down yet again. Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue, 80% trash, rushes in on top of the Emissary of the Tides, and of course all of the Abyssal Dwellers nearby. Somebody will need to go start the RP or the role-playing. I believe it started. You can see a Shara floating in the background there. So in order to spawn Lord Stormsong, that needs to get going. Teams usually efficiently use this time before you don't have access to the boss to kill the trash here residing in this temple.
Yeah, and Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue having that Bloodlust available for quite some time here, not committing it anywhere, meaning they probably want to save it for the last boss, which if you're not trying to one phase the last boss, by one phase I mean only get one intermission, then I feel like it's not actually necessary to save the Bloodlust. But a lot of teams actually did have some trouble with, you know, boss people going down left and right, the healer going down. So maybe just having this safety net of saving the Bloodlust all the way until the end is what teams choose to do. As they just sit down, have a drink, and then they're gonna engage Lord Stormsong as soon as he gets available or gets attackable.
Gets available. I mean, he's available in just a second here. 86% for Buffer and Nerfrogue. So they're in that perfect percentage that, you know, we like to see the teams at before the final room, because we do know that this season, actually beyond any other dungeon, this one was changed the most in terms of trash percentages. The eels in the final area with Volzith do not give nearly as much percent anymore. So you have to kind of pre-kill some more trash. In fact, 6% worth more trash, because we knew teams before would be, I think, 80, 81, something like that in the previous season.
Yeah.
So 86% here, exactly what they need. Lord Stormsong already started and had Void Bolt reflected back in his face from Ching BB. 80% already, because I was actually going to say before someone fortified, but we're in Tyrannical. So immense amounts of damage and burst damage coming in from this group. Really nice to see as a King of Ruins is just now dealing with the Initiate trash before the dual council boss.
And we're really going to talk about Buffer and Nerf Rogue's execution from this dungeon here. I mean, they only have one death, which is the one death on the Rogue that just happened on the bridge. Outside of that, perfect plays. Almost no problems at all. Doing all of those pretty dangerous pulls that we've seen from the western region as well. Those snapping pulls at the very start of the dungeon. So very, very clean run by Buffer and Nerf Rogue. And they're really showing up here. And even if King of Ruins would have played perfectly without any sort of deaths, they still probably would have lost to Buffer and Nerf Rogue. Just showing their best play here and just really showing up to this dungeon. As Loda does get the Mindbender here, and this being mind controlled, just making sure he gets rid of most of those orbs and also getting rid of the mind control on him.
Well, and bold claim there, saying that Buffer for sure win, but indeed they are playing. You know, in the previous matches that we kept talking about, we kept saying, yeah, obviously they're winning. You know, they're a much higher seeded team. They're used to this kind of thing, and of course they're usually going to triumph over a team like King of Ruins. But you know, we gave them a bit of scold as well, in the sense that, you know, they're playing way too safe. They won't be able to compete with the West at this rate. But this is the kind of dungeon that you want to see them compete at. This is the kind of pace, rate, and skill that you want to see this team compete at, and this certainly can hang out with the best in the West. So nice to see this finally coming out of them, as Lord Stormsong hits 17%. They're still sitting at that 86%, which is what they need to go in the final room. Supreme gets what I believe to be the final mind control from the Mindbender there. Unfortunately, did not have his Cloak of Shadows, had used it earlier as a precast in order to not be interrupted during his cooldowns at the beginning of the boss. King of Ruins here is dealing with the 2 council boss. They're not opting for the ledge strategy for some of the reasons that I'm sure Nagura mentioned. It is a lot of pressure on the tank to perform there, and perhaps they just don't feel comfortable doing that right now. So as a result, as predicted, they are killing Guildcaller Faye first.
Yeah, so Buffer and Nerf Rogue finishing off Lord Stormsong here. So they only have the last boss left and the 14% trash, which is going to be the eel packs that they're going to pull on top of the boss. And there's also the denizens that they still have to deal with at the start of the platform, which usually most of those teams, they are engaging the boss first, making sure the healer has the buff, the increased damage and reducing max HP buff, just to be able to deal with this trash faster, having this extra healer damage, definitely helping out for those kind of pulls that we'll see later on. We'll see what exactly to do with the eels. There's no DK in Buffer and Nerf Rogue's lineup, which usually when they have a DK, we say it's a possibility for them to only get one intermission phase because of the huge cooldowns with the army and the Bloodlust for DK is just doing so much single target damage. But with the comp that Buffer and Nerf Rogue is running, it seems very unlikely that they are going to have enough damage to pull that off.
Yeah, no, I don't think that's coming. We haven't seen a single person be able to pull that off. Bit of disaster here, though, for King of Ruins. As their tank goes down, they do have the battle res available. In fact, they still have 2 left right now. It's been usually a pretty long dungeon, so 3 battle reses would have been available for both teams, but they both had to commit one at this point. Guildcaller Faye has fallen because of the burst strategy that King of Ruins is using, putting them in a much more stable Brother Iron Hull only situation. So they were able to recover with that by resing the tank there. Volzith here early has been pulled now for Buffer and Nerf Rogue along with the eels, which is seen pretty commonly from teams, and now they kind of grab 2 of the 4 eel packs, cleave it on top of the boss here for this first phase, and then do their transition phase as well.
Yeah, one more thing to note is that by not having a DK here, this makes this fight even more dangerous for buff for Nerf Rogue, just because Loda, with this buff, reducing the max HP, we've seen so many healers go down here, getting hit by a tentacle, pulling aggro, or having a cast from the denizens go through. Any ability that you get hit by basically one-shots you because of the reduced HP. So by not having the DK, not having another battle rest outside of the rest of Druid's battle rest, is definitely going to put some pressure onto Loda here. Not only does he have to deal with a lot of, not only does he have to do a lot of damage, but he also needs to make sure that he definitely does not go down, because that's might just cause a full team wipe if the healer goes down. Now, they are dealing with the intermission phase here, and once they're done, they're probably going to deal with the denizens that we see here in the middle as well.
Yeah, the triple denizen trash, after which I suspect largely that they'll pull the double eel pack on top of... Well, actually, well, they might. There's not really any reason for them to do that outside of trying to save a few seconds in the dungeon where they certainly don't need to, but those eels are very dangerous, believe it or not, the double pack, just because they add an increasing unlimited stacking shadow damage over time effect on their tank, or well, really their primary target, but obviously the tank, unless he's not in melee range. And that, multiply that with raging, when those eels all simultaneously hit, that extra 100% damage, it gets out of hand pretty quickly, and it oftentimes makes for a dead tank really fast. Nonetheless, denizens have been killed here as Ching backs up just a bit. That sunken denizen naturally moves very slowly and does increase damage. On top of raging, he just wants to get away from that ASAP. No eels for this team right now, as they finally interrupt the boss, pop Bloodlust, and we're going to have to keep an eye on this Resto Druid, because he's going to do Loda damage.
Yeah, definitely want to take a look at the DPS that Loda is going to pull out here. You saw the essence being used here at the start of the fight as soon as it got interrupted, and the Bloodlust being popped as well, so there's going to be a lot of single target damage. Now, unfortunately, again, they don't have this DK, which does a huge amount of burst, so it's very unlikely that they are going to finish this boss off before the second intermission cast. But you can keep an eye on the energy bar that you can see below, at the very bottom of the screen, below the HP. Once this energy bar reaches full, once it goes to full, he will start casting the intermission cast. Now, the cast takes like 1 or 2 seconds, 2-3 seconds for him to finish, so there's a little bit time left, but the boss being on 23%, there's no way.
There's absolutely no way here as Volzith gets to about 20%, starts casting here, and we're going to see one more transition phase coming out of Buff Warrior, Nerf Rogue yet again going in at it. This time they won't have a triplicate of denizens to deal with afterwards, because they already finished that trash off, which is nice for them. 17% still left on the boss as they get trapped in this next transition phase. Ching immediately popping Ablative and Undulating. This add in the tank phase, or the tank healer phase, has actually quite substantially hard, so the tank oftentimes needs to dip in and out, because the more you stay in there, the more you force your healer to have to heal you, and your healer is your main damage dealer in that phase just because of that buff. So gotta play just a bit modest and defensive as the tank there, unless you can survive those face hits, which some tanks certainly can, and Warrior is a good option for that in terms of mitigation. Lord Stormsong here finally pulled for King of Ruins, getting down to almost 80% now, but they're only at 71% trash, so whatever they do from this point on, there will need to be some backtracking for at least about 14 to 15% worth of trash.
So I'm staring at the damage meters as Loda is so close to beating Supreme on the damage, and I really hope he does before they finish off the boss here. Oh, they're actually also deciding to pull some eels before they finish off the boss to keep Loda's buff. So he'll probably lose in damage just because it's very dangerous for the healer to go into melee range if those eels are there. Just because if you get hit, if you pull aggro or you get hit by any sort of those eels, then you will die to the buff. But he actually used his stuff, and he is topping the damage meter. There we go. Just had to proc it.
Just barely. Just barely top the damage meter.
You love to see a big staff proc on Shrine of the Storm, and the last boss, full damage buff and everything. Buff or Nerf Rogue taking that nice 2-0 victory in Shrine of the Storm after that one. That was great.
It was all right. I mean,
okay.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm still wrapped up in the staff proc. My bad.
The staff proc was great, but I mean, once again, I'm going to be hard on before Nerf Rogue here. It looks like this time, the practicing to the Western region, you got to compare them to that.
That's true.
I don't care that they just 2-0'd this other team. They aren't going to BlizzCon. Before Nerf Rogue is going to BlizzCon. They have to prove that they're like. I feel like, once again, same thing I said earlier. They got to prove that they're ready for BlizzCon. That's all I'm looking at for this entire tournament for before Nerf Rogue.
Yep, and as you mentioned before, it has to make sure that they're getting themselves ready in terms of their routes, in terms of their strategies. This is also the good trial and error phase for these guys, and finding out where the big mistakes, where the big inconsistencies are for these skips.
I mean, none of the skips here. Okay, so before Nerf Rogue in this dungeon, give them credit where credit's due. They looked very clean up until, I think it was around 70% trash there. For their first death was on the bridge pack. So that was the only time they had a problem in the entire dungeon. So outside of that, this was a pretty clean run. And to be frank, Raging Sanguine is not the easiest difficulty to practice on this dungeon on. They lost a decent bit of time due to just mismanagement of Sanguine. But outside of that, it was an okay dungeon. I just think it could have been, if they were a little bit more aggressive with their pulls, they probably could have gone 2 minutes faster, maybe 2.5, 3 minutes faster. So, I get that they're playing safe just to get the tournament win, but I want to see them play better for, just to see what they can do for themselves and just for a better tournament for BlizzCon.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, when you look at how these teams are setting up some of their pulls, where are they going to start making a bunch of errors onto that one? Sanguine in particular, they spent a lot of time having any of the acolytes running off into the corners, getting topped off by Sanguine, and then they had to pull the patrol, the double apprentices, all the way down after they fully healed up, kill them once again, and then there's just more time. So while it might be good enough for their opponents right now, couple months we got BlizzCon rolling around, but it is going to be good for them to get into that upper finals. So as we take ourselves onto that bracket, Buff War Nerf Rogue is going to be moving on, which also is going to start bringing us into our next round in that upper semi, since 430 and Black Mamba are going to be coming up. And we've seen 430 previously here, Sloot, but Black Mamba's just kind of seeing which of their opponents is going to be failing more as they start making their own mistakes.
I mean, the thing is, Black Mamba is kind of being Black Mamba that we've seen all year, really. I mean, yeah, they're just super inconsistent. They never managed to get out of that, bad juju that the rest of their teams in their range at the beginning of the year, like even Season 1, got out of. Abracadabra rings a bell, 40K rings a bell. These teams kind of got themselves together and performed much better from the beginning of the year to the end of this year. Black Mamba never really kind of got out of that. Of course, it doesn't help that you have to re-roster and, re-synergize and everything, but they never got out of that funk, Jack.
Yeah, I'm kind of wondering what it's going to take for them to start getting out of that funk, because we kind of mentioned previously, this is also preparation for them for the future, making sure that they're building themselves up in terms of that competition. Zyra, you mentioned as well, some of these things you can't just get done by running dungeons with each other in a more, I don't want to say casual environment, but not in a tournament environment. Once you have that tournament pressure that's coming towards you, you're able to start testing and finding those backup plans for when failures are happening, how you might look at, okay, how are we going to be able to rebuild ourselves so we're in the best position to capitalize off a team if they make a mistake too?
I mean, so when I was the captain for my team, whenever we did practice runs, for me, it was very specifically what were the problems that we were making and how could we solve those problems. If I saw something that was a trend over a period of time, I'd look at that problem, talk to that player, be like, okay, so what's going wrong here? In the case of one of my players, it was that they didn't have a focus kick macro, which seems like it's something obvious, but once that problem was fixed, it wasn't a problem for the rest of practice outside of the 1 or 2 times they maybe forgot to hit the button. Some of these things can't be fixed by just slamming your head into dungeons for 8 hours a day, which is when we talk about the Raider IO article, that's one of the things Black Mamba was doing, and they kind of 3 other players burnt out because of it. I like what they're doing so far. It seems like they're slightly getting better. I mean, throughout the summer season, they haven't necessarily stepped up to the way they were playing at the end of the spring season, but you have to be smart about your practice. Just going 8 hours a day isn't going to solve problems.
Sure. And when we talked about how this new team, of course, they had to replace 3 of their DPS. They had to replace, their entire DPS team and rebuild for this season. We talked previously about it, Nagura, where Black Mamba was a team that was playing before MDI at the start of the year. They were playing together in a lot of local tournaments as well. So those things they've already kind of built up for themselves. They already knew each other. They played well together, and that helped them in Season 1, but they still haven't gotten quite there in Season 2.
Yeah, it's definitely going to cause some problems if you just don't have this synergy going on, especially if all of your damage dealers are all of a sudden gone. If you replace 1 damage dealer, the other 2 damage dealers can maybe pick up the slack and just start telling him what kind of communication is needed. But as soon as all of your damage dealers are gone, maybe something the tank and the healer didn't even know about that the damage dealers did that are gone, and all of a sudden you have all of this missing communication, all of the missing synergy. So their goal has to be just synergizing again and making sure their team dynamic is getting up to speed like they had it in the spring season. So that should be their goal, and they should be improving for future MDIs just so they can stick together and just be better next time around.
But I think at the same time, the DPS are the most replaceable of the entire group, right? I think the most important thing in almost any of these MDI polls is going to be the synergy between your tank and your healer. Like, as a healer, knowing when your tank is going to use his cooldowns and when he's going to want your externals is really, really important. In most of these dungeons, and this is completely different this year than it was in Legion MDI, almost every single poll this time around is kind of determined by markers. They have weak auras that mark specific mobs, and okay, DPS player number 1 interrupts and CC's X marker. Player number 2 DPSs and interrupts is the blue marker, and so on and so forth. They have this all figured out, and it's just execution based. And I feel like as a player, your only goal is to do your CC when you need to and don't die. And these guys just can't seem to get it done. It's just really confusing to me.